So I wanted to share with you today a little bit about micronutrients, about the nutrients that's in the soil. As Cassidy was talking about earlier, um, we deal with all of these nutrients every season when we grow any kind of crop. And just to show you an example, cations, that's our positively charged nutrients. When you have a soil test done, generally you will have a base saturation done on that soil test. And those base saturations measure potassium and hydrogen and calcium and magnesium and sometimes sodium, depends on what they put on there. Now, you could get a more detailed soil test if you want to let you know what all is in the soil, but that is your main cations that will do the majority of the work for you in the soil. And those are the ones that are also attached to the colloids that's in the soil. Now, then you turn around and you go to anions, which is where phosphates and stuff come under, as well as boron and sulfur and chlorides. Molybdenum is a negative charge, so it's a cation. And that also makes them more successful to leaching, what we would call leaching. And this chart shows you that the mobility in the soil of some of those nutrients, we talk about, hey, nitrogen leaches out fairly quick, or it evaporates, or gets out of the soil. When we throw it out on the top of the surface, we run the risk of some of that getting away from us. And we don't want that to happen. So what in the world could I do to help everything in the world that I'm doing in the soil? So as Cassidy showed you in her presentation, if I came to your farm and I said, hey, I've got a product that will make everything in the world that you're doing on your farm, the application of fertilizer, the application of chemicals, fungicides, you name it, anything you're doing out there, it would make it perform and work better. Would you be interested? And I would think you would be. So that is where our activated humic technology comes in, along with the MLC, the Surge, that adding that to everything you're doing, along with even the AgriSuite, is a product that helps generate into the plant. It helps stabilize, it helps hold these nutrients in the soil so that the plant can take them up. Because remember, the plant's stuck. It's stuck right in the soil where it is. It can't. The only thing it can go out and get is send roots out and get nutrients. So we have to have, number one, biology in the soil. And I think that's kind of where we have maybe miscalculated on what we're trying to do to get things up in the plant to get a higher yield. Is not always more NPK or more micronutrients or more of anything. What we have is to look in the soil and find out what we have. And then in turn, we turn around and say, okay, I'm going to put a product on that will actually release it or make it available, even release it off of the soil colloid so that the plant can take it up. But then in turn, the MLC and the Surge creates that condition in the soil that the microbes love, and it favors it. And in turn, it's the microbes that take the nutrients, whether it's nitrogen or P or K, into the plant. So I wanted to run through a few nutrients here just to give you some ideas about what nitrogen does in the plant, why it's important. And you can see some of these arrows is not only is nitrogen a food source for your biology in your soil, but your plant takes it in. You see the response of usually all of these nutrients that you're going to put on. And in the far left corner is a picture of nitrogen deficiency. So if you've ever seen this in your corn plant, and really it works the same way, very similar in soybeans or wheat or any other plant, that nitrogen deficiency always starts down the middle of the center rib and then works its way to the outside of the leaf. Even up here in the tip, you see it maybe even browning or getting burnt. So those are indications to you that your plant is lacking nitrogen or it needs it. And the arrows are pointing to the areas in which we usually watch or can see. I would love to see dark, almost black green leaves on a plant. Means that you have a 100% factory going strong on photosynthesis. That is related to the color. The color is going to show you how much photosynthesis you're getting. So here's some breakdowns of nitrogen. It is essential in photosynthesis. It also works together with magnesium to help pull all that off. So it's directly responsible for creating protein in content in the plant, whether it's corn, wheat, soybeans, or even vegetables. We get into other crops as well. So nitrogen plays a crucial role in ear and kernel development. And then the nitrogen moves to the ear from other plant tissues even prior to silking. If you've ever seen, walked out in your cornfield and you've seen the cannibalization or the drying up of the leaves at the bottom of the plant, and then your green color is not as green as you want it to be further up in the plant, it's literally pulling out or sucking out the nitrogen out of those lower leaves to sustain its growth in the upper leaves. So the plant will do what it needs to do to continue to grow and to maintain the yield potential. We look at phosphorus. There's big issues, what we were just talking about, with how do I get phosphorus uptake early, because that seedling needs or likes to have phosphorus early on to help with the seed development, help establish the root mass and everything else that's going on early. And so using a 100% ortho fertilizer is your best economics to do, and you could use less of it but get more results because the plant only takes it up in an ortho form. So in the bottom left corner, if you ever go out in the field, and usually this happens early, you go out and you look at your plants and you see any kind of purpling in the leaf, that is phosphorus deficiency. So the plant's going to tell you in signs and colors what it is lacking. And anytime a plant lacks a nutrient and you see that deficiency, it has cost you yield. It just depends on how fast it recovers from that as to how much yield that you may end up losing. So when we talk about phosphorus, it's taken up only in this ortho form. So when you do use an 80-20 starter, then it has to convert over time. And remember, we're usually in cool soils early. So that could mean anywhere from 20 to 40 days after you've planted that the biology in your soil would convert that poly into an ortho form for it to be taken up in the plant. That's why I'm saying some farmers use anywhere from 8, 10, 12 gallons of 10-34-0, but they're only getting, it's like a 60-30 poly ortho blend. And it takes a long time to get that phosphorus that the plant really needs converted. So if you used a 100% orthophosphate, then now you're talking down around 3, 4, 5 gallons to get immediate uptake of phosphorus into that plant. So it also relates to vegetables, watermelons that you guys grow over there, other vegetable crops, tomatoes, and the fruit quality of the fruit, the sweetness, the content, the sugar content. So we think of potassium. So this is our three main big ones is nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, NPK we call it. So back to phosphorus for just a second. You have applied phosphorus for years and years and years. You've applied potash for years and years and years. So since you put all those out for years, how come your yields are not really stair-stepping and climbing? Is because you've reached a salt, I would call it a salt index in your soil that is also limiting your soil biology from working to their efficiency because of all this salt content. Plus, phosphorus usually immediately gets tied up. And in a lot of cases, potassium gets tied up in the soil so that I don't get my full potential of what I went out there and throw it on. You don't ever go out in the spring and throw on 200 or 300 pounds of potash. And then you come to the end of the year and you go, oh, I'm empty. It used every bit of it. So I got to go out and put all that on again. No, when you soil test at the end of the season, you've still got a huge reserve. So now we're back to what we were talking about with the humics and the sugars is we now have tools that we put on the soil that releases that off of the soil colloids, stabilizes it through microbials, and then we get it into the plant up through the root system. If you can see down in the left corner, it's kind of a small picture, but potash deficiency always starts from the outside of the leaf and works its way in. And that's regardless of what crop you're growing. That's the characteristic of how that plant shows up as deficient. Now, what you're seeing in this picture is we've gone a little bit far along before we try and correct it because this is still fairly young corn. How much yield have we lost? I don't know. We won't know till the end of the season, but preventing it is what really needs to happen and take place. So in potassium, some of the characteristics is that it has a great impact on crop quality, kernel weight. Now we're talking test weight, the number of kernels per ear, and even the rows around can also be influenced with potassium. So when we add the humic and the sugar to that, now we are actually increasing the efficiency of whatever we are adding it to, whether it's in a liquid fertilizer form or we've already put the humic and the sugar on the soil and you're spreading a dry form, you're going to increase that efficiency of it. It also influences water use and efficiency, which is great because we've got to have some drought tolerance to get us through different sections in the weather. It's essential for protein synthesis. Some crops we're really looking for high protein, especially if you're going into feeding it to animals or anything like that. And here's a crucial part. It's involved in the activation of more than 60 enzyme systems throughout the plants. And this is any crop. And it helps the plant to overcome the effect of diseases, which we know that we're being bombarded with all the time. I jump to calcium because on many soil tests, even in the base saturations that we require and ask for you to have on your soil test, calcium is your number one mover of nutrients in the soil. It is your largest catalyst that is in the soil. We know that the calcium is what affects pH. It also is what affects the ability for them plants to take up the nutrients. And when you see on a soil test, a base saturation of, usually we like to see it in the 70% range. Some I've seen in the 80s, but many I've also seen in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. So anything below that 65, say, is going to be decreasing your efficiency of everything you've got in your soil that you've put on fertilizer wise to get up into that plant. So that base saturation of calcium is very, very important. The other thing that calcium does, like I've said, it is the gateway to all other nutrients to move into the plant. It also affects your cell elongation, so that you'll see either short plants stunted or not, and then that's what helps the cell walls to strengthen and grow and to grow the plant. So it activates several plant enzyme systems throughout the plant too, and it also improves your root growth conditions. So our next component that goes hand in hand with calcium, and the reason I keep pointing to your base saturation, remember these are cations, so they work together. So if you have a high calcium, usually you're going to have a low magnesium. If you have a or a high magnesium, you're probably going to have a low calcium percent, because they go hand in hand. And think of this too, that calcium aerates the soil, so it makes more ability to get oxygen and stuff down in the soil. But magnesium tightens the soil, even holding moisture longer, especially up in the Northwest, across the top of our country. We have a lot of high organic matter soils. We have a lot of high pH soils, and they are high in magnesium, and they are mainly saturated, and that's where many of the people up in that area, as well as out in the Midwest, revert to tiling. So they want to tile it to get the moisture off, to help drain it away, so that this magnesium could come down and begin to aerate the soil and loosen that soil for that plant to grow in and the roots to penetrate through. I didn't put a picture in, but if you ever want to use, find out your soil compaction, you use a penetrometer, and a root cannot grow through greater pressure than 300 psi. So a root would hit that zone that's really compacted, and then it would turn and either grow one way or another, but it would flatten out. And you probably have seen this, maybe not on your farm, but other pictures on the internet, where we talk about sidewall compaction. Then we get a mohawk root mass, because it cannot penetrate that pressure on those sidewalls because they've been compacted. The picture in the lower left shows this light color, basically between the veins of the leaf, and it just shows up in that manner. And that's one indication that is a magnesium deficiency. But generally, we don't see too much magnesium deficiency because of the high mag. It also is blocking other nutrients from coming into the plant. So I begin to show up a lot of other nutrient deficiencies other than magnesium. It's involved in photosynthesis. It, together with nitrogen, teams up and creates that chlorophyll to keep that whole process going in that plant. It affects the seed development. It aids in phosphate metabolism and plant respiration. The activation also of many enzyme systems. So magnesium is an important part until it becomes overwhelming, and then it becomes a hindrance to allowing other nutrients to come up into the plant. One of the other products that we see a lot of farmers put in furrow, or 2x2, or wide drop, is zinc. Zinc will also help release tied up phosphorus, and it will help it to come up into the plant. So now you've got the liquid humic, you've got agri-sweet sugar, and you've got zinc in the furrow, all working in combination to help release phosphorus early, or even convert it in some of your fertilizers to be able to be taken up into the plant quicker, better, more efficiently. In the far left corner, you're seeing that zinc, that striping begins to show up, zinc deficiency. So zinc plays a critical role now, probably as much as any time, in helping to get more phosphorus up in the plant, among other things that it does. So zinc aids in the synthesis or production of growth hormones and proteins. So just remember, inside this plant, whether it's soybeans, wheat, corn, is a factory going on, and it's producing through sunlight carbohydrates throughout its system. It produces enzymes, hormones, other acids that is released into the soil that feeds and harmonizes with your biology in your soil, so that they work together synergistically to grow the crop and to get the nutrients into the crop that the plant is looking for. So that is very important that we utilize the zinc in that manner, because it creates a lot of things happening into the plant. We now have known, or beginning to see, lots and lots of deficiencies in sulfur. You see the picture in the lower left. Sulfur deficiency begins to show up also in these striping effects a little differently in the leaf. But remember, we have probably began to use up the majority of the sulfur that we got for free for many, many years out of these coal plants or the electric plants that belched out all kinds of sulfur into the atmosphere. Then it rained down in our soils, and it was good for the plants. Well, now we are paying lots and lots more attention to the need for sulfur added to the soils. And remember, anytime that we show a deficiency or a very low number in sulfur, it's going to take more sulfur to bring that up in the soil over time than just a little bit, like a pint or a quart. You may need to add several pounds of elemental, then also go out with a product that's been converted to a true sulfate form, is how the plant takes it up. And so you may have to approach it from several different ways to get that sulfur into the plant, because just like number one says, it constitutes 2 of these 21 amino acids, which form the proteins and stuff in plants, that is the building block for that factory. So remember that corn, soybeans, or wheat is a factory going on all the time, and sulfur is going to play a huge role in that, along with the ratio of sulfur to nitrogen will also affect your efficiency of your nitrogen being taken up into the plant. So big time on soybeans, it promotes nodulation for N fixation by the legumes. So it's going to play a role. So if you want to experiment, you're going to pick some of these micronutrients such as sulfur, such as we're going to get to manganese, but these are a couple of them that you're going to really hone in on, begin to try in your system, and see if you don't see better response of nutrients coming up in your plant. Of course, we know that you can always monitor all these on a tissue sample. So boron is probably the most overlooked nutrient that we deal with. I can't tell you, and Paul probably knows too, we look at many soil tests, and the boron is way down at like 0.2, 0.1, 0.3 or 4 or 5. You want at least bare minimum 0.8 parts per million of boron. I really love to see it at like 1.2 or 1.5, because if what you'll see, you see this little ear right here. If you ever see tip back on the end of your ear where it did not fill all the way to the end of the ear, many times that is related to this low number of boron in the soil. And that is the one nutrient that we are beginning to take harder and harder looks at on especially high yielding farmers that's gone out here and grown the high yield corn or soybeans, is they are taking harder looks at adding more and more boron. So I see we have a question. You have seen a couple of my soil tests. This is a guy in North Dakota, Steve. where my base saturation is in the 50s for calcium and close to or at 30 for magnesium. I will be using 2 gallon of MLC and 2 gallon of AgroSweet pre-plant, but I just wonder if I'm addressing the calcium properly. I have used Calcium Plus when it was first released, but question if 1% will have enough effect in my program. Address my question with the entire group if you feel it pertinent. True, Steve. 1% calcium in Calcium Plus is probably not enough to address the kind of issue that you're dealing with. You will begin to see that calcium number improve the more liquid carbon you use, the more AgroSweet you use, because it's going to begin to bump off more and more hydrogen components that's tied into that colloid. And when you do that, we're changing the pH. The pH then, in effect, begins to release nutrients to make them more available to the plant. And I mean, you can use gypsum, or you could use another straight calcium kind of a lime. But as usual, I mean, everybody wants fast response, quick response. I don't want to have to wait a long time. And so I would take a look at that. And the picture in the bottom corner, you see how that curls up with the boron deficiency. I don't see very much of that, even though there could be some of that going on out in the field. So boron is essential for germination and pollen grains. Boron also, here's another thing while we're on that subject. Boron will extend, if you have good levels of boron in your plant, it will extend your pollination period while your corn is in pollination. If you have a lack of boron, you're going to have a shorter pollination period, and you probably have smaller pollen grains. So that's also an effect of boron. And here we are talking now what boron is associated with sugar translocation and protein formation. So if you're putting the MLC and the AgroSweet together and you're using boron, now they're all three working together synergistically. So we have one more question. Had a grower ask about applying Calcium Plus foliar while the plant absorbs this product through the plant leaf tissue. Yes, it will, because the 1% calcium that is in our Calcium Plus product is a chelated calcium, and it's unlike normal calcium that's on the marketplace. If you get anything above probably a 3 or 4% calcium, now you're using a calcium chloride, or you're using another form of calcium that is not very efficient to go in the plant, and in many cases even burns the plant because of the acidity or the alkalinity of it. And so that's why we use a chelated calcium, and 1% does make a difference on foliar. But if you're lacking a whole lot, like Steve was talking about, his base saturation is down in the 50s, then I'm going to show you here in a minute where that you lose a whole lot of your efficiency of the products that you put on the soil, as well as the uptake into the plant. So boron is also one of the most important micronutrients that we're talking about, and it supports the structural and functionality integrity of plant cell membranes. So here's a reason I'm talking so much about boron. This is the biological sequence of nutrition uptake in any plant, including, I mean, even a weed, we call a weed, but any plant, it starts with boron. And that boron activates silicon that's in the soil. Then that carries through to the calcium. The calcium combines with the nitrogen, transfers through the magnesium into the phosphorus, utilizing carbon in the soil, which forms sugars, and it's combined with potassium, which is taken up into that plant. So all of these are combined together in a biochemical sequence that allows your plant to grow every single season, every time. It doesn't matter if it's a flower or the garden or whatever. That is the biological sequence of plants, nutrients going up into the plant and being carried through the plant. So if we break any of this, like for example, we have very low calcium, or we've got too high magnesium, you have broken or slowed down this entire process and lessened its efficiency, getting it up into the plant. So manganese, we're beginning to see manganese play a bigger role than we thought. Also, when we're wide dropping, especially, you might try and add some manganese to see if you get better performance in your plants and uptake. You could probably even see this through visual, better green of the plant, the green plant staying greener longer, even toward the bottom. So anytime you can keep that green plant greener toward the bottom, you're going to help with plant health. You're going to help with that whole factory working properly and not lacking nutrients, because it's when it begins to cannibalize those bottom leaves, now you're going to begin to lose yield, because that's what we're doing here. So in the picture in the left, you see that also the striping is between the veins, and that shows you some manganese deficiency. We see some of that, especially as the plant's growing at probably around V3, 4, 5, and we go out and walk some fields, you might begin to see that. The thing that I see, and it's kind of hard to describe, if you've seen a field of corn that is growing, whether it's corn or soybeans, you've seen soybeans the same way, and even wheat. When that leaf is so dark green, then you don't have any striping in it. You don't have any light color in it. But when you begin to go out and walk some of these fields in the spring, and you see a lighter color in those leaves, to me, that is what's indicating a hidden hunger of not enough nutrient of what some kind. It could be sulfur, it could be manganese, it could be even nitrogen, not getting up into that plant. And that's where that term comes from, the hidden hunger, because we don't really know what it is, but yet it's not allowing the plant to produce its full potential. So manganese, why are we talking about manganese? What plays a direct role in photosynthesis and the chlorophyll? It accelerates germination and maturity while increasing the availability of phosphorus and calcium. So deficiency symptoms appear on younger leaves. This is another thing you could probably end up Googling up, is different nutrients will show up in different places. Like some of them will appear on the newest growth, the youngest leaf. Others will show up on the oldest leaves. In the case of nitrogen deficiency or potash deficiency, we'll usually see it in the bottom or the older leaves, because the plant is cannibalizing itself, taking it out of the older ones to feed the new leaves. And that's where you're going to lose yield. This is why you can't get the yield higher. You don't want that to happen in the plant, that it robs itself from the bottom and takes it to the top. So manganese plays a huge role. Iron, we've also begun to see where iron is playing a role. I know up in the Northwest, especially, and beginning to show up many out in the Corn Belt, that you'll see where iron has gotten too high, more like a toxic. You see this iron corrosis in soybeans, especially, not so much in corn, but you'll begin to see things like the striping of this leaf down in the lower left corner showing iron deficiency. Well, in many cases, it could be that your iron is a different valence in the soil, actually becoming toxic and not actually available to be taken up by the plant. And therefore, soil testing, tissue sampling is going to help you indicate and show you where you're at, what's going on, what's happening, and then even an application of an iron, and you want it to be an EDTA form, you want it to be very readily available for that plant to take up. You can't just go out and throw on like elemental iron, because that's not going to convert fast enough or quick enough to make that much difference. And we know that whether it's Y dropping is probably the best way to get the most nutrients into the plant. But if you want a really quick recovery, is where we have used the foliar applications of many of these nutrients to bring that plant out of that deficiency, but that still doesn't fix it. The reason you showed it up is you have it in the soil. So we got to still go back, measure the soil, fix the soil in order to correct that problem. So the iron acts as a catalyst to the chlorophyll formation, and iron acts as an oxygen carrier. Remember, you've got a living biological system in the soil, and they have to have oxygen. You know what happens if you flood the field and there's water standing on it, and your biology begins to suffocate and begins to die off. Worst case scenario, you smell it. You smell that bad smell out there, where that's the biology that's dying or has died, and your soil is now not as active as it could be, and it has to have the biology in the soil to make everything work. So they live off of oxygen, and then in turn, when they die or reproduce, they give off carbon dioxide. Well, the plant takes up carbon dioxide. That's one of the reasons that you want your biology to exchange back and forth the oxygen as well as the carbon dioxide for the plant's use, and it benefits from that. Molybdenum, you don't need much of it, but we are seeing it playing a big role, especially in soybeans. They take it up in this anion form. I've not ever seen, I don't think, excessive molybdenum. Usually it's the lack of. And when we foliar spray or we have some in the soil, then usually the soybean plant does well. But we're now beginning to see that molybdenum plays a role in corn production as well too. So you just need to take in the whole gamut of the nutrients to see really what makes a difference. What do I need? We don't put on very much molybdenum. Usually it's like a pint, maybe no more than 2 pints, depending on if you need it or not. But small amounts of some of these nutrients make a difference in all of the others exchanging and being taken up into the plant. So the focus that we have been doing over the years is NPK. Well, now we got buku PK out there, and we have to add the nitrogen. So let's begin to start taking a look at micronutrients and the role that they play, and then adding a little bit of micronutrients that I need begins to release more P to be taken up, release the K to be taken up into the plant. So it's utilizing what I have already put out there for years. And the sad thing is that, and Paul and I both worked at co-ops over the years, and that's all we knew. To be honest with you, I didn't know anything about a humic till like 2004 or 5. Never heard of it, but they've been using it out in the Northwest for like 50, 60 years. In fact, they don't plant anything out there without humics with it. So it has become a game changer when we began to put the liquid carbon together with the AgroSuite. They work synergistically together to complement each other in the soil, and then I get better response out of my soil. I begin to get more activity level in my soil, not only from the biology, but I begin to change, like Cassidy was telling you, I begin to change pH. I begin to change CEC. I see a different soil structure. I see a different soil texture, because everything will work to complement that seedling that I'm planting, and then its root mass to be able to grow down, grow deeper, grow stronger, access more nutrients is all working together with the micronutrients and the biology in the soil. Copper, we've heard of and used some copper. We have an EDTA type of a copper that is used very small amounts, pint to the acre, something like that. But you've also seen it used, especially in vegetable crops and stuff, will help with deterring diseases, because copper is like a natural insecticide or fungicide or something like that. So people are beginning to look at using more and more copper. It doesn't take much because it doesn't go anywhere. So just think about that. The picture in the lower left, I don't think I've ever seen a copper deficiency in all the years I've been out looking at things. So we got another question. When is the best time to apply Molly on corn? I would say either put it in your 2x2 or wide drop. So earlier in the season, remember, we're building this factory and it all starts at the beginning when we plant. So whenever I do that at planting, I am preparing this plant for the most possible potential I can get out of it. And at any point in time, and I think you heard Cassidy talk about stress, we're trying to alleviate stress. But anytime this plant goes under stress, whether it's from weather conditions or heat or too wet or too dry or lack of a nutrient, and then we see it. So my question is, okay, when did it start for me to see it? And then how long is it going to take me to correct it is going to be very important of how it pertains to accomplishing my yield potential. And we know through the genetics today, whether it's corn, soybeans, wheat, we've improved the genetics so much so that it really requires more maintenance. It requires more input to be able to hit that high yield. But the neat thing is the genetics is there now to allow me to hit the high yield. Otherwise, you would never hear 300 plus bushel, 500 bushel, 600 bushel out there. How in the world can that happen? Well, you've got the genetic potential to do that now. In the same way in soybeans, with like Temple grew up the soybeans that he grew last year and broke the yield record. So it's possible. I mean, that's just the thing about is managing this enzyme regulation and production. It promotes production of grain. Copper activates enzymes and catalyzes reaction in several plant growth processes. It's also linked to vitamin A production in the plant. Remember, this is a living soil that we are growing stuff in, and the better we keep it upkept or fed, and this is where the role of humics and sugars and fulvics come in, along with some of the other nutrients, is you don't want in excess of any of the NPKs, your big micronutrients, or even some of the minor nutrients. You don't want excesses, because that will lead to issues like this. When we're talking about excesses, okay, we run into nutrient antagonism. So when I have too much nitrogen, for example, we are learning that to spoon feed a plant, especially corn, even wheat, to spoon feed it 2 to 3 applications, I get a lot more production. But if I go out and shotgun on a large amount of nitrogen, I am actually throwing the balance in my soil off. I am throwing my biology in a totally different direction. Now it's got all this food to eat, and it has to go get a carbon source to mix with this nitrogen to consume it. Well, now it's going to burn up my organic matter, and I don't want that to happen. I want to keep my organic matter there to hold nutrients and to hold moisture. So then it's going to block usually potassium and calcium to be taken up in the plant. when we have an excess of potassium. How many of you ever seen some of the soil samples where the little bar goes off the chart on potassium, or even on phosphorus? I've seen both of those go off the chart. And the co-ops and the farmers say, hey, I got to put more P and K on. Well, why? You really need to get what you got out there unlocked. Well, this is where the humics and the sugars come in, the surge product, the fulvic, unlocking and driving or bringing that product, your P and your K, up into the plant. So in excess of it begins to block some of these other nutrients from being taken up into the plant. When calcium is so high, it blocks boron, magnesium, and phosphorus. I've seen calcium base saturation like 92%. Well, then that's way too high. It is dominating everything and cannot let up some of the other nutrients into the plant. So this is one of the reasons that we talk about balancing your nutrient levels in your soil. They are balances that we need to achieve for the maximum uptake and the maximum production. But not only that, then also for your biology to work fine and to perform the best that it can, you got to balance out these nutrients that's in the soil. So as you go down through here, like magnesium blocks the calcium and potassium. The iron blocks manganese. Too high manganese blocks iron, molybdenum, and magnesium. Too high copper blocks molybdenum, iron, manganese, and zinc. It's funny how one little small element like copper, we just talked about it, you don't need very much of it. But if you had an excess of it, it is now blocked like 4 other nutrients from getting into the plant in the levels that I'd like to get them in there. Zinc blocks the iron and manganese. Molybdenum also blocks copper and iron, and then sodium. So too high sodium blocks your potassium, your calcium, and your magnesium. Aluminum, it blocks your phosphorus. And if you have too high aluminum, which is a heavy metal, usually if it gets to the excess level, you're going to have a really hard time drying that corn down. So one of the things to take a look at also that affects this nutrient uptake is your pH. Okay, so pH, actually, most of you probably know this, but pH only stands for potential hydrogen, because when we have lots of hydrogen captured on the soil colloids, it makes the soil very acidic. And so you can see on this chart, once we go very acidic, now we cannot get the nutrients that the plant really needs in it, but now we're in excess of iron, manganese, boron, and copper and zinc. So this is why you want it to be in this 6.5, 6.8 range. Not only do you get the most use out of your nutrients in your soil, but you also get a condition for your biology to live in that they like. That this is the most favorable pH range that they can do lots and lots of production for you. You get way down in the acidic range or the alkaline range, you're slowing all of that that microbial activity down and not getting the conversion I want it to convert. So just for an example, what pH does, look what happens when you got a 5 pH and you go out throwing all kinds of fertilizer you want, and you're only going to get, hopefully, even, I doubt it seriously, that you'll get 50% of the usage out of that, what you just threw on. So correcting pH and looking at your base saturations is one of your first priorities to correct before you go out trying and over fertilize to get to a higher yield goal or yield potential. So we kind of looked at these earlier going through, but I threw those in just to show you this is what nitrogen deficiency looks like. Phosphorus is a purpling. Potash always comes from the outside in. Magnesium, you see this yellowish, kind of bronzy looking. Boron really curls the leaf up, puckers it up. And then zinc has a different characteristic of yellow stripes and stuff in the leaves. And then most all of us have seen lack of water. The plant curls up to try and conserve that water, excuse me, in the plant so it doesn't leave. And here's just a few more nutrient tie-ups in the soil, preventing nutrients from getting into the plant. The high levels of magnesium ties up nitrogen. High levels of phosphorus ties up zinc. High levels of pH ties up manganese. High levels of potassium ties up copper and boron. And then high levels of calcium ties up potash, phosphorus, and many other micronutrients from getting up into the plant. So I think you've gotten an overview of micronutrients and their roles in the plant, why they're so important. But here's the other culprit that we've been doing for years. Each and every one of the nutrients, NPK, any kind of elemental micronutrient, is a salt. It starts as a mineral salt. And the biology in the soil has to convert any of this into the usable form that the plant can take in. So you can throw any and all of this on the soil you want. But if your biology is not active out there and not what I like to call revved up, lots and lots of numbers, a big army working for you, you're not going to get conversion of this because of the salt level. And I hate to even bring this up because Paul and I both sold a lot of muriate of potash and still do today. Farmers use a lot of this, but remember, it has 47% chlorine in it. And that affects your soil biology. I would use half the amount of sulfate of potash if you can get it, and you will get more and more use out of the sulfate of potash than you would muriate of potash, but it's the cheaper form, and we go out and put that on. So I just wanted you to be aware of the salt index that's out there, and then it comes back to the same thing, that whatever you have that is the least in your fields and your nutrient levels, and in this case it's even water, if I have the lack of water, then this is the one that will cost you the most yield. So whatever it is, if you have out of balance and low numbers on any particular nutrient, that becomes your limiting factor till you fix it. Now, humics and sugars, remember, is a catalyst, and I'm putting it on the soil, and they can begin to help balance out nutrients that's either tied up, bound up, not able to be on the soil colloids, not interact with the soil, not interact with the plant, not even interact with the soil biology. So you've added a catalyst to the soil when you put the liquid carbon on and the sugar on and the fulvic on. You've added a tool component that will allow your soil to begin to improve. And just remember, this is the best tillage tool ever made. God made it out there to till up those soils. And this is, to me, is the best indicator. If you want to know what your soil health looks like, go out and dig you up a great big old shovel full of soil and count the earthworms that's in it. And what we've done sometimes is dug up a square foot of soil. And when they are in this tough conditions where your soils are not balanced, then you'll only see like 2 or 3 earthworms. But you get soils in balance and you get the biology army working for you, it's great to go out and dig up a shovelful and count 30 or 40 earthworms, because they are moving nutrients for you. They're producing nutrients through their humus put out their rear end. And they're also creating air holes and air pockets to not only let the oxygen in, but that the water and stuff go into the soil. So they are your friend. And the more that you can complement that soil to make them grow, then you're on your way to the better yield potentials that you can achieve. So just remember, consider using our humic acid and the sugars, the fulvic acids and foliar sprays. And it contributes to all of these, improves your germination, increase water infiltration, and improves your soil tilth. You'll see that happening. Begin to take a look at boron. Look at your potassium levels. They need to be up in the 3 to 3.5. Sulfur, be sure and take a look at your sulfur component on your soil test. And then by all means, go out, scout your fields, try new technology to see if you can't raise the bar on some of your yields, and then analyze your crop. You can do this through tissue sampling, through soil sampling. That's your greatest tool, guys. You don't ever go to the doctor and he just looks at you and says, well, you look pretty healthy. He takes a blood sample, he runs an analysis on it, and then he tells you, hey, you're low in magnesium, you're low in calcium. I need to give you some pills or some supplements to bring your body system up with those nutrients so that it performs better and you will even feel better. So that's one of the reasons you went to the doctor to start with, probably because you wasn't feeling right. So the same thing is going on with your soil. That is a living biological system out there. You've got to feed it and you got to take care of it and you got to try and balance it so everybody gets along in there. And then, of course, soil test, tissue sample, and always thank the good Lord for your blessings.